Hello and welcome back to Dear Jordan. This is a space where I slow life down on purpose, where I take things that once felt confusing, overwhelming, or unfinished and look at them again with a little more clarity. So, my cousin and I love to exchange memes back and forth. Usually they're the kind that explain exactly what it means to be a Gemini or an air sign or someone with ADHD. You know the ones, the kind that you read them and think, wow, that's uncomfortably accurate. We'd laugh, half joking, half self-diagnosing, stacking label on top of label until one day it hit me. My brain is my brain, and it's going to function exactly the way it was meant to function in order to fulfill whatever Andrea was put on this planet to do. And that realization is what led me here. Today's letter is about labels. Not the harmless ones we use to organize things, but the ones we place on people. The kind that start as descriptions and quietly turn into definitions. The kind that limit growth, flatten complexity, and convince us that we are only one thing, instead of a whole person still becoming. We live in a world that constantly asks us to declare who we are in a neat, understandable term. But life isn't neat. People aren't simple, and identity was never meant to be finalized early. This letter is about uniqueness, about difference, about the quiet pressure to shrink in order to belong, and the cost of doing that over time. So if you've ever felt reduced to a role, a diagnosis, a comparison, or a label that didn't fully capture who you are, this letter is for you. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and listen in. Dear Jordan, labels are great for jars of homemade concoctions, for store-bought products, for boxes in the basement and files that need organizing. You know what labels aren't great for? People. Somewhere along the way we decided that simply being a person wasn't enough. It's no longer sufficient to say, this is who I am. Now you're expected to wear a name tag layered with explanations. So not just your name, but your politics, your gender, your background, your diagnosis, your trauma, your tribe. And while some labels can be useful for understanding, they become dangerous when they start doing the defining. I am more than a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, more than a woman, more than a Hispanic, more than a mother. And yet, if I don't choose one of those labels loudly enough, I'm suddenly not allowed in certain rooms. If you aren't registered as a Republican or Democrat, you can't vote in the primaries. When I was 18 and I registered to vote, I registered Republican, not because I believed deeply in the platform, but because my parents were Republican. The truth is, I don't care much about politics. I don't care about Washington. I don't care about the performance of power, because I've watched how often people trade pieces of themselves just to belong in that world, how conviction gets sanded down to fit in the room, how integrity becomes negotiable when relevance is on the line. So if anyone ever digs into my background and finds that label attached to my name, there should probably be an asterisk next to it, one that says registered Republican but not defined by it. I remember watching your sister as a teenager so eager to label herself. And I get it. When you're young, you're trying to find your place, your people, your sense of belonging. That instinct is human. But what I wanted her to understand and what I want you to understand is this. Any community that requires you to reduce yourself to a label in order to belong is asking you to shrink. You are Jordan, and that alone is enough. Scripture tells us that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, not mass-produced, not categorized, not duplicated. No matter how many labels you put on yourself or how many others try to hand you, you will always be uniquely you. A lot of labeling is really about relevance, about being seen, about proving you matter. I know that feeling well. When I was younger, I was eager to make my identity known. I called myself a creative, a writer. I started companies, designed logos, tried to carve out a clear lane for myself so I could just feel like I existed with purpose, even if only to myself. But here's the part I didn't understand back then. When you tie your identity to a role, a title, or a label, you make your worth fragile. The moment I struggled in any of those self-assigned identities, I shut down. I told myself I wasn't enough, and instead of growing, I abandoned the path entirely and chased something new. Psychology calls this identity foreclosure, when we lock ourselves into a version of who we think we're supposed to be, and any failure feels like a personal collapse instead of a learning moment. My mind has always been multifaceted. I can think deeply, broadly, creatively, often all at once. Today, people might label that ADHD, and maybe that's accurate. But again, it's still just a label. What we have to understand, both as individuals and as a society, is that everything exists on a spectrum. Why? Because people do. I may show traits of ADHD, traits of complex trauma, traits of emotional neglect, not because I'm broken, but because my life has been uniquely mine. Your life will never be someone else's, and someone else's life will never be yours. You may find community, you may find people who relate to the pieces of your story, but you will never be a replica. And that's not a flaw, that's the design. Belonging doesn't come from fitting perfectly into a category. It comes from being comfortable in your own skin. Comfortable enough to say, yes, I'm different, and that's the point. If everyone were the same, how unbearably boring would this world be? We were meant to disagree, to challenge one another, to bump against difference. That friction chips away what truly isn't you and sharpens what is. Reducing yourself to a label might make others more comfortable, but it will cost you access to your full self. I see this most clearly in education, where children are expected to behave the same, learn the same, test the same, as if brilliance can be standardized. But a teacher's job isn't to manufacture sameness, it's to recognize genius. As you grow older and step out of those systems, your biggest work won't be proving who you are. It will be accepting yourself, accepting who you are, loving who you are, and still being willing to grow, because growth never stops. If you try to fully define yourself at 22, that version of you won't even exist by 35. I'm not the same person I was in my 20s. Life made sure of that. I went through things that shaped me, and while I wish some of those lessons came easier, I can see now that shaping isn't punishment. Scripture reminds us that God is a potter and that we are the clay. He doesn't shape us to harm us. He shapes us to prepare us, not to torture us, but to form us into something capable of carrying purpose. So don't rush to label yourself. Don't shrink to fit a category. Don't confuse description with destiny. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to be complex. And above all, you are allowed to be Jordan. I have made a conscious effort to embrace not only your uniqueness, but the uniqueness of your siblings as well. Growing up, I was often compared to my brother. He was what people would call a gifted child. Knowledge and practical calculations came easily to him. He excelled academically. School made sense to him, and because of that, his intelligence was easy to recognize, easy to measure, and easy to celebrate. I was not that child. I wasn't failing, I just wasn't getting straight A's. And in a system that values performance over process, that distinction matters more than it should. I was recognized for my creativity, for my artistry, for the way I could imagine, express, and connect ideas emotionally rather than mathematically. But those gifts didn't carry the same weight in classrooms where achievement was tallied in grades and awards. So without anyone ever saying it out loud, the comparison was made. And I learned early what many children learn, that intelligence has a hierarchy. The truth is, I didn't have the same brain my brother had. If someone had asked my brother to write a fictional story about a random bridge in the middle of nowhere, he would have struggled. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because his mind worked differently. He would have wanted to know why the bridge existed, who approved it, who built it, what purpose it served, what problem it was meant to solve. He thought in systems and structures. I thought in story and symbolism. Neither was better. They were simply different. Psychology tells us that when children are repeatedly compared, they don't just learn about difference, they learn about worth. And when worth is attached to one narrow definition of success, children either overperform to survive or internalize the belief that they are less than. That belief is a lie. We were placed on this earth for different purposes. I am fully convinced of that. Otherwise, we would all be clones, interchangeable, replaceable, unnecessary. Scripture tells us that the body has many parts, each with its own function. Not all hands, not all eyes, not all minds built the same way. And it reminds us that iron sharpens iron, meaning growth comes from difference, not uniformity. I'm sure there are systems and powers in this world that would prefer we were all the same. It's easier to control sameness, easier to predict, easier to manage it. But God has never been interested in sameness. Over and over in Scripture, we see people attempt to override their God-given purpose to become something they were never designed to be. And every time, it leads to confusion, destruction, and loss. History repeats this pattern because humanity keeps forgetting the same truth. We are not wiser than our Creator. When we ignore divine design in ourselves or in others, we don't just lose individuality, we lose direction. That is why I have been intentional with you and your siblings. I don't want you growing up and believing you need to outperform one another to be valued. I don't want you measuring your worth against someone else's strengths. I don't want you shrinking who you are to fit into a system that wasn't built to see you clearly. I want you to know this. Your mind has a purpose. Your way of seeing the world matters. Your difference is not something to correct. It is something to steward. And my hope for you is that you never confuse comparison with calling or approval with identity. With all the love I am still learning how to give, your mom. If there's one thing I hope you take from this letter, it's this. You are allowed to grow without rushing to define yourself. You are allowed to change without explaining it to anyone. And you are allowed to exist outside of the labels people place on you, even the ones that once felt helpful. Identity isn't something you lock in early. It's something you discover slowly, honestly, and often through experiences you never planned for. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to follow Dear Jordan wherever you listen to podcasts and to share it with someone who might need the reminder that they are more than one version of themselves. Until next time, keep giving yourself permission to be exactly who you are and to keep becoming. This has been Dear Jordan, Letters to My Daughter.